evening and welcome to another insightful episode of Vantage Point with Dr. Dayan Jayatilleka. Now, Vantage Point is a program that is telecast every fortnight, and we delve into the headline-making stories on not only the newspapers here at home and the media here at home, but also the stories that are covered across the globe, not only pertaining to Sri Lanka, but also on world politics and current affairs. Joining me in discussion, as usual, is Dr. Dayan Jayatilleka, former diplomat and political analyst. Good evening, Doctor. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Mahina.
Well, there's a lot to talk about in today's program, mainly because there have been two significant events that have happened over the past 2 weeks. One was the most recent event that took place on Sunday, which was the Victory Day Parade. 5 years on since Sri Lanka was freed from the clutches of terrorism. And over in the subcontinent nation, we saw a 63-year-old former tea seller sweeping the elections in India, the largest democracy in the world, to become its new Prime Minister. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the program, Doctor. Let's start from here at home. It's been 5 years since the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers, were defeated by the Sri Lankan armed forces, and we saw on Sunday it being commemorated in Mathura. However, there have been mixed reviews and some even criticizing the commemoration of this victory. What are your views on this, Doctor?
Mahina, I mean, why shouldn't we be happy? Why shouldn't we be grateful? We remember what it was like, and for so long. School kids couldn't go to school and come back. There were parents who used to go to work separately in case they were blown up by a tiger parcel bomb. All that has stopped. I'm not saying that we have the kind of peace that we deserve, but we have peace, and that peace was possible only because the tigers were defeated. And that wasn't done easily. There was a tremendous amount of heroism and sacrifice on the part of the armed forces. Certainly, crimes seem to have been committed to some extent, including by members of the armed forces, in the concluding part or just after the war was over. But that is entirely secondary. That happens, unfortunately, in most wars, and that has to be dealt with by each society at a time of their own sovereign choice. But if you take it as a historic event, this is something that we should all be happy about. Even in the north, because there's no longer war. Children aren't dying, and I'm not saying it was all they were all killed by the tigers, but the killing on a large scale has stopped. It's over. That suffering is over. So it's something that needs to be celebrated. It need not be all celebrated in the same way. But I have a problem with these critics of the commemoration. One, there are many arguments. One is that a civil war, civil conflict should not be commemorated, that it's not done anywhere in the world. Now, this is absolute nonsense. France's national day is called Bastille Day because Bastille was the prison fortification that was stormed by the revolutionaries. July 4th is a day of the triumph of the revolution. And the revolution was not against some foreign invader. It was against the old establishment. It was very much a civil conflict, and most revolutions are preceded or accompanied or followed by civil war. So was France's. There was also Great Terror, which of course nobody is commemorating, but the fact that there was Great Terror with the guillotines and so on doesn't mean that July 4th is not commemorated every year. So it's absolute nonsense to say that civil wars or civil upheaval, civil conflicts are not commemorated. If they have a liberating aspect, they are commemorated in the world. And Sri Lanka's did. We were liberated, quite apart from the reunification, and that's also important. But we were liberated from bombs going off in our streets every week for 30 years. Now, if that's not a liberation from fear, from terror, I don't know what is. We saw how the American people celebrated when those young fellows were finally tracked down. One was killed after the Boston, one bomb went off during the Boston Marathon.
Yeah.
We saw the United States celebrated when Osama bin Laden was taken down finally by SEAL Team 6. We've had 30 years of this on a much larger scale. We had several 9/11s. Given our population, the United States is over 200 million. 3,000 died in that. We have 1/10. And we remember the central bank blast. We remember what happened to the employees of Selinco. How many were blinded? So, there is every reason to commemorate and celebrate the defeat of the Tigers and the ushering in of peace. Though we have to work to improve the quality of that peace, and there we can criticize the government. So, those who did not want to participate in the government's celebration should have had their own. I don't see why the main opposition party, which boycotted the official celebrations, having lost so many leaders to the Tigers, including President Premadasa, why they didn't have their own commemoration and do it in the way that they think is right. Is it something not to be celebrated? Are they not happy that Prabhakaran was killed? The man who murdered so many of the UNP leaders and president? I just don't understand these people.
Now, but is there a question or speculation about the nature of these celebrations or the commemoration? Now, you said that people, the Tamil people too, should be able to commemorate this Victory Day as it is billed. However, there were reports that came out on international media, even in the local media, stating that people in Jaffna were not allowed to commemorate the events that happened in 2009, or commemorate their loved ones, or go to the Kovil's. There was heavy security in Jaffna. So is there a question about the nature of how it is actually celebrated?
Yes, there is. But there again we must be very clear. Bastille Day, which I referred to, France's day of its National Day, is celebrated with the military parade and parachute drops. I watched it twice as the official representative of Sri Lanka. I have photographs from there, and I must say that our parachutists did very well, because when I was watching in Paris, parachuting is of course very difficult, and one of the parachutists injured his leg. But yesterday I saw a perfect drop on television, despite the fact that it was a seafront and it's difficult to navigate. So this is a military parade on July 4th in Paris. There's nothing wrong with having a military parade to celebrate the victory over terrorism. The reunification of the territorial boundaries of any country is something to be celebrated, even if it is by civil war. Now, that doesn't mean that this celebration should go on and on forever and ever. It is possible that another generation may decide to do it differently. I'm not saying that the people of the North should celebrate the victory of the Sri Lankan Armed Forces. No. I'm saying that they certainly should logically celebrate the end of the war. Because the war ended. They may not like who won or how the war ended, but the war ended, and that's a big deal, I think. Now, as for the commemorative activities, I believe that this time the army made it clear that private commemorations of the dead would be fine, but there could be no use of LTTE symbolism. That, I think, is a fair position. I mean, I would even say public commemorations. I mean, everybody, every community, every individual, every family has a right to commemorate its dead. And it may be the case that they are proud of the heroism displayed by those who fought for the Tigers in the service of a cause that they believed was right. But it's also a fact that the Tigers conducted a campaign of extermination against Sinhalese and against Tamil Democrats. So we are not talking about some romantic rebellious force. We're talking about a fascist force. Therefore, while one may commemorate those who died in the war, including the LTT fighters, I think it is fair to continue to insist, at least for another period, that there be no LTT symbolism, so that it should not be a glorification of the tigers, but a commemoration of those who may have died in or out of tiger uniform. That's a different story. So I think we need a better policy, and we need a clearer policy. But if people want to celebrate or commemorate those who died as Nazis, that won't be taken kindly anywhere in Europe. We see the tigers as Nazis. It doesn't mean that those who died as members of the German army in World War II are not or cannot be celebrated. There just cannot be a celebration or commemoration which is collective and has the swastika. So I think we are very fair in saying no tiger symbolism. And we have the right, because we suffered under these guys. No High Commissioner has the right to tell us how to commemorate a historic event. If they don't want to come, they can stay away. But we went through it. We suffered. We died. We fought. We prevailed. And nobody from outside has a right to tell us.
Mm-hmm. And that was something that was a sentiment that was echoed in the speech delivered by His Excellency President Mahinda Rajapaksa at the Victory Day Parade. He said after the conclusion of the war, Sri Lanka opened its gates to the world, and however the opportunity that was given was used as something by countries against Sri Lanka. He said that although Sri Lanka opened its gates for countries to come and evaluate, this was misused, and this was echoed in the President's speech at the Victory Day Parade. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, these are the countries that didn't give us any weapons to fight when we were under siege from the tigers, or ones who did give us some weapons, but also tried to rescue the tigers at the last moment. So, I haven't heard any criticism of the commemorations from those countries, especially the countries of Asia and Eurasia, including our neighbors, who did support us during the war. I'm not saying they're perfectly happy about the commemoration, but they haven't criticized it publicly. Those who do are those who didn't stand by us when the war was going on, and therefore do not have a moral right to tell us how to celebrate the peace that came as the end of the war when we defeated the Tigers.
We speak about the end of the war, Doctor, and it's been 5 years on. The questions that will be on the minds of the common man in this country is, has Sri Lanka achieved what it has set out to achieve after the conclusion of the war? Is Sri Lanka in the place it should be?
No.
And why is that? Why do you agree with that?
No, we are not. Because every society has this challenge when a war ends. There are wars which are just, but they can be followed by a peace which is not just. It depends on the ideology of the leadership that wins the war. Now, if it is an ideology which is inclusive and has a notion of the reunified nation as one that is integrated on the basis of equality, then it is possible to build a just and fair and sustainable peace. But I don't think that clarity was present in the Sri Lankan leadership which won the war. It did well to win the war, very well indeed, because its predecessors failed to do so. But I must say that I also have my own criticism of the commemoration, because the commemoration that airbrushes General Sarath Fonseca out of it is a little, there's something a little wrong with it. But it was more right than wrong, let's put it that way. But the peace that has been built over the last 5 years has something very wrong in it in more ways than one. The fact that almost 80% of the people voted against the government at the Northern Provincial Council election means that there's a profound sense of alienation of the people of the North. I think that somewhere in the leadership, perhaps not the president, but he's not been strong enough to impose the correct view on the others. Somewhere in that post-war power elite, there was a sense that it's not only the Tigers who have been defeated, and not only the Sri Lankan state that has won, but somehow the Sinhalese have won and the Tamils have lost. And therefore, the Tamil community has to know its place. And the Sinhalese are, especially the Sinhala Buddhists, are going to be the top dogs. Now, I think that's where it went wrong. That every minority community must know its place, and its place is secondary. Now, I think those people who thought so didn't look at the world map, and certainly didn't look at the map of the South Asian region. And this was predicted by two very outstanding people. One is a non-Sri Lankan and one is a Sri Lankan. Let me start with the Sri Lankan. Justice Veeramantri, C.G. Veeramantri, who wrote a two-part article to the Daily Mirror just after the war and said, let's not make the mistake that the Europeans made after World War I, when they imposed a peace of the victors on defeated Germany, and that led to the rise of fascism. Let us instead learn the lesson that Europe learned and applied after World War II, when they defeated the Nazis, but they helped Japan and Germany back onto their feet. They restored those countries as democracies and integrated them into the Western system. Now, we didn't do what Justice Veeramantri recommended. The other person who warned us about this was Lee Kuan Yew. In a long interview which has appeared as a book a couple of years ago, he was interviewed by a journalism professor from the United States called Tom Plate. And in that interview, which, as I said, has been published as a book, a hardcover book, Lee Kuan Yew was asked about Sri Lanka. And he says, the Sri Lankan leadership thinks that because they've defeated terrorism, that they have defeated the Tamils. You can't defeat the Tamils. They're very industrious. The Sinhalese can't defeat the Tamils. The Sinhalese can defeat the Tigers. The Tamils, he says, as we know from Singapore and Malaysia, are a very industrious community. And they're spread all over the world. They can't be defeated, and this is the mistake that Sri Lanka seems to be making in the post-war period. There's too much a singular chauvinism. So I think that is why we have not built the kind of peace that we could have. That is why we are isolated from important parts of the world. That is why we are under tremendous, often unfair pressure on the human rights front. That is why we have some problems in our relationship with our large neighbor. And that is why we are an unhappy place. We are happy that we won the war, but we are not happy with the peace, mind, and none of us are. Except perhaps for a few at the top. So that is because we have won the war, but we haven't won the peace, and we may in fact be losing the peace. Now that's very different. Now that criticism that I'm making, which is very strong, is different from the criticism of those who say we shouldn't commemorate the victory. That's two different things.
But how would you make that difference? Say that it's all right to commemorate the Victory Day parade, but however, there's all this marginalizing of the Tamils that you see happening. And you also spoke about the reunification of territorial boundaries. But shouldn't the important thing also be the reunification of people? The people of the north, the people of the south, the people from all over Sri Lanka, the reunification of all these people. And the most significant event that took place after the conclusion of the war in 2009 was the elections in the northern province, where the Tamil National Alliance came into power, and where people thought, okay, at least now there would be some sort of working together between the government and this political party that has come into power.
Well, Mahina, I said privately and publicly in 2009 after we won the war, and after we had won our diplomatic victory in Geneva just 1 week later, I said, have the provincial council election now. We are on top. By we, I didn't mean Sinhalese, I mean the Sri Lankan state. We will never be this strong again. Have the provincial council election, because you can't run that place without a Tamil interlocutor and intermediary. Have the election, have a democratic election. And if you don't, the TNA is going to recover and it's going to be more radical than it is now. They didn't listen to me. I reminded the people at the very top recently in a conversation. I said this in 2009. You didn't listen to me. And in fact, I was fired for my pains. Now, that's immaterial. What is important is that at that time in 2009, there were two views. One view was contained in the President's own written agreement with the Government of India on May 21st, 2009, the joint statement, and on May 23rd with Ban Ki-moon, where the President promised to fully implement the 13th Amendment and initiate a dialogue with the Tamil political parties in order to consider further steps. Now that was one view, and I believe that if that pledge had been implemented, we would have been in a much better place, and the reunification of the peoples would have taken place. At least they would have learned to live together again on a better and different footing. But there was another view. The other view, and it's still not dead, it's still around, is that we shouldn't have had the provincial council elections, and basically we shouldn't give the Tamils anything. I mean, certainly not an autonomous province, and they should live the way that we tell them to live. Now that view prevailed for a while, or at least deadlocked the other better view that the President initially held. And I think he was juggling between these two, and then he finally decided, late in the day, to have the Northern Provincial Council elections overriding the views of the hardliners, including those very close to him, whom he's reliant on. So he had the Northern Provincial Council election. Now that gave us another chance, but it opened a door that we didn't walk through. So you have the Northern Province or the Provincial Council like a Pandora, which doesn't even have lights in it. But it's just a frame. Power has not been devolved according to our own constitution. So this is why there is a gap in which Tamil opinion has become more and more radical, internationally and including on the ground in the north. That is why the alienation continues. And there are still people who are components of the government who are saying very shocking things. I was watching television and I saw a separate commemoration, apart from the government's commemoration, by the JHU, where I saw the leader of the JHU, Minister Ranavaka, warning the Tamils that any time you want another Nandikara, the Sinhalese will be ready to provide one. Now he doesn't seem to realize that that is not the way you have a rapprochement with a community, your brother or sister community on this island, with whom you've had a 30-year war because of mistakes you both made. And therefore you have to learn to live together, and you have to learn to talk differently to each other. It can't be done on the basis of threat. That's not only bad thinking, it's really something one shouldn't try to do, especially after Mr. Modi has won the election. And Jayatilleka has won 36 out of 39 seats in Tamil Nadu. It's dumb to talk like that. But there are these dumb people who are very vociferous. You know what I mean. In government, these hardliners who really don't represent much in terms of votes, but I think they're connected to power centers in the state structure, and they're probably proxies for those power centers. Therefore, we are losing the peace. We are in a very precarious position. That has been, in fact, the real betrayal of the armed forces. The armed forces did what they could. They won the war. They can't win a peace. They did the military job, which was very difficult. As the John Kerry Richard Lugar report says this is one of those rare, almost unique examples of a legitimate state militarily defeating a very powerful non-state militia. Now this is something great. I was told by a friend, I haven't seen it, that the History Channel had a report a few days ago of the Sri Lankan Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol, the LRRPs, and how they went, their training, and how they went into the jungle and beat the tigers on their own territory. But that's the military part. It's not up to the military to do the political part or the diplomatic part. I'm satisfied that we did our part in Geneva, but now we've lost 3 times there. And the political part, the fact that the TNA got almost 80% means that somebody didn't do the political part. So, the armed forces have been let down by the politicians and the officials.
And 5 years, the next 5 years would be crucial for Sri Lanka, because here it is, after ending this 3-decade-long war in a precarious situation, as you said, the local political system itself is yet to find its footing in the backdrop of this victory. And also, the foreign policy of the country is coming under heavy scrutiny as well, because it has opened its doors for countries like the US and UK to come out strongly against Sri Lanka, and we saw it at the UNHRC as well. And also, the human rights resolution and the outcome of that. So, the next 5 years, leading up to a decade since the victory over the Tamil Tigers, is going to be crucial for Sri Lanka. How does Sri Lanka stand strong amidst all of this?
Maya, is a very good question.
And I mean Sri Lanka as in the people of Sri Lanka.
Absolutely. Maya, every time I go on television or say something in the newspaper or to a radio station, I take a risk, because people can remember if I say something stupid, then everybody's going to hear or read it. So as a public intellectual, it's a risk I take. So I'm taking a risk now when I answer your question, but I have to say this. I think it's my duty. If we don't change for the better, if we have this discussion 5 years from now, you're talking about 5 years from now, Sri Lanka won't be in the shape that it is today. If we don't get smart and if we don't change for the better, 5 years from now, we will not be able to stay in this same way. We won't be having this discussion. In all probability, we would be at the very least, a loose federal system, or even possibly 2 states, with the north having gone with Tamil Nadu, and maybe there would be a Crimea type situation here. So if we are to stop that, we have to change course. We have to be patriotic, but we have to be smart patriots, not dumb patriots. We are still fighting, some of us are still fighting against the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment is the cheapest price that we are going to have to pay to keep this country together. A couple of years down the road, that deal won't be on the table anymore. Even now, I'm not sure whether the deal is on the table. I think we still have a window. We are okay so long as Sambandhan and Vigneswaran are there in play. And we might be able to sell the full implementation of the 13th Amendment and stop the deterioration there. But if that window closes, and time is not in our favor, if you take what happened between 2009 and now, 5 years, we wasted those 5 years. We've gone backwards. We are more vulnerable than we were at any time since the victory. We are under siege internationally. Yesterday, day before yesterday, on the day of the commemoration, the websites overseas had a report, a very detailed report, very well prepared. I think it's this Australian ICEP together with some other people, about war crimes. And there were photographs that I hadn't seen. And I've seen lots of photographs. Photographs of Isipriya alive, Isipriya and another girl alive, Isipriya and the other girl dead, in between a soldier helping that other girl, not Isipriya. There are photographs of the sort that I've seen. There's a timeline, Mahina, about the white flag thing. I'm not saying the timeline is right, but somebody's done a lot of research. 8:05, 8:09, this day, that day, who spoke to whom? What was the comeback about the white flag incident? It's all being prepared for prosecution. It's like it's a report that will be readily given to Navi Pillai's office when they start their probe next month. And it is an embryo of something that will be sent or will be taken by the ICC chief prosecutor eventually. It is something that will be submitted to national courts all over the world under universal jurisdiction. It's about to happen. Now, we can't fight on two fronts. We need to utilize the opportunity of the Modi victory to use India as a shield. But you can't use India as a shield unless you get under the Indian umbrella. And to get under the Indian umbrella, you have to devolve power to the North fast, and you have to address Indian security concerns about our external relationships in the military field. If we don't do that, Mr. Modi is going to turn into President Putin. Now, I like President Putin, but I'm not so sure that I'd like to see what happened in Crimea happen here. But it can happen.
Well, on that note, we go in for a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the Indian election and more of how it's going to impact Sri Lanka. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Vantage Point here on MTV Sports, and I'm in conversation with Dr. Dayan Jayatilleka. Doctor, we left off with Narendra Modi's victory in the Indian election. Now, talking about the Indian election, it's the largest democracy. It was held over a period of 5 weeks. It was a tedious elections, and one wonders how around 500 million votes were really protected in those couple of days leading up to the final results being announced. How do you view the overall election in India?
First, I'm so impressed and humbled by the fact that the Indian institutional framework worked so well that this massive election was held. And this is not a uniformly rich country. There's a lot of poverty, very backward areas, a great deal of unevenness. It's a subcontinent. And boy, oh boy, they pulled it off. So, firstly, my salute to the Indian institutions, and this brings us to the fact that in Sri Lanka we used to have those institutions until 1972, and there was an effort of a brief return with the independent commissions under the 17th Amendment, which was abolished and replaced by the 18th Amendment. So I think the fact that the Indian election went off so smoothly points to the need for Sri Lanka to bring back the independent commissions. So that's my first response. The second is that it's a historic turning point. I mean, Mr. Modi's victory is not business as usual. It's not one party replacing another party. Mr. Modi's party, the BJP, or the embryo of the BJP, has been trying to get here from 1947. Mr. Modi was initially a member of the RSS. So these are two different views of India. It's rather like the victory of Likud in Israel. So it's a shift, and what a massive tectonic shift it has been.
And the figures coming out from the election results with 370,000 votes secured by the BJP, and that is like, if you talk about the parliament, the Indian parliament, 543 member parliament, out of which 282 seats secured by the BJP and only 44 seats by the Congress. Now the Congress has been in power for a decade with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh at the helm, but this defeat for the Congress is its worst ever defeat. And not just statistically, but if you look at it from a historical point of view. How would you read these figures, Doctor, and how do you think Narendra Modi, who was a former tea seller, was able to, make this amazing tectonic shift in the Indian elections, as you said?
Well, it's a strength of personality. I mean, his father came from an even more humble background. He started off very humbly, but he joined the RSS at the age of 8 or 9. So this is a political animal, you know, and sheer drive. He's been the chief minister of Gujarat several times, and he's made Gujarat shine. So this was the appeal to the Indian people. I can do what I've done with Gujarat for all of you, for all of India. Mm-hmm. And there's another factor. This man is a nationalist. He's therefore not offering a trade-off such as that with, for instance, the UNP offers, which is, okay, we'll make the economy boom, but you know, you're going to have to accept the fact that we are not a nationalist or patriotic party, or our leader is not. Modi gave them a win-win scenario. I'm a nationalist, and I represent the culture of the majority of the people, but I'm also an economic wizard in terms of economic management. So what's not to like? And this was the message. The BJP took a gamble, and it paid off. The gamble was this. Now, mind that this is a parliamentary election. It's not a presidential election. We are used to presidential elections. The Americans are presidential elections. But the BJP fought this like the US presidential election. The entire campaign was Modi-centric, Modi-driven, Modi-led. It was all about Modi. The Congress also reacted to that in that way and targeted Modi. So, with the figures coming in, NDTV had this witticism, you know, its post-election coverage was under this not banner, but this headline, which they used for days, called India Modified. So this is what happened. The lesson for Sri Lankan politicians is a party that does not have a strong leadership. By strong, I don't mean strong in sucking people in your own party. What I mean is that doesn't come across as an effective, a leader who doesn't come across as an effective communicator, a leader who is known to be a doer, a leader who is known to be close to the culture of the majority of the people. If you don't have a leader, male or female, who's like that, you're dead in the water. You're finished. It's not just about family control, because, okay, I don't like nepotism in politics. I detest it. And someday it's going to catch up with the SLFP. But if the Congress remained under the same Nehru Gandhi dynasty but had, I don't know, Indira Gandhi or a strong personality to fight the election, it wouldn't have been this bad for the Congress. But he was led by somebody who's a bad communicator. So that's the main lesson for the Sri Lankan political spectrum. We are going into a presidential election, Mahina. This time next year it will be all over. The parliamentary election will have been over. We'll probably be debating or discussing what happened in the parliamentary election, which will come months after or weeks after the presidential election. It is very probable that the presidential election will be declared in 6 months from now. Not held in 6 months, but declared after November 19th. Now, it's going to be a fight of personalities, a clash of personalities. And if one side doesn't have a personality, you can't have a clash of personalities. So then you have a landslide, which is what can happen, even in Sri Lanka, if things go the way they're going. It'll be very much like that. And as I said, I take a risk every time I talk on television, but TV audiences have been watching me for about 15 years on Sri Lankan TV. I haven't got an election prediction wrong so far. And I can safely predict that if the main Democratic Opposition Party, the UNP, doesn't rebrand and it proceeds as it is with its present leadership candidacy, it's going to do as badly as the Congress. I mean, we are talking about what? They're going to poll in the 20% range. That's it.
Now we're talking about Narendra Modi's election campaign and how a strong election campaign that he led. There were actually articles saying that he had flown to several states and he actually outbeat the young Gandhi
Yeah.
in visiting and holding rallies in all of these states. But one of the main black marks, or one of the main setbacks that he had in his political career, was in Gujarat in 2002, where the anti-Muslim riots came into play and over thousands of Muslims died. And he was pointed the finger at by saying, he did not take much action against these riots. But now he has come out with these policies of economic reform, about creating India to be a modernized India, an India where there is minimal government and maximum governance. All these slogans that he has come out with. Do you think that when he actually is sworn into power in the next 2 weeks or so, whether he'll actually stick to these, or whether this nationalist sort of image that he creates would go on as it is?
Well, Mahina, India, unlike Sri Lanka, has a very strong constitutional framework, and that constitution is secular. Mr. Modi has said that his religion is the Indian constitution. So, we had an early experience of the BJP under Mr. Vajpayee. They didn't try to change the contours, the parameters of the constitution. There was some nibbling away at educational texts and so on, but the framework of the constitution was respected, the secular framework. Mr. Modi is not Mr. Vajpayee. Mr. Vajpayee was a much more moderate personality. Mr. Modi will try to stretch it a bit more. His sort of brilliantly choreographed performance after he won at the Ganga, the river Ganga, the Ganga Ghat. I mean, it was an openly Hindu ritual. So he will draw a distinction between government and state. The Indian state will remain secular, but the trappings, the flavor of what Mr. Modi himself does would be more overtly Hindu, but cultural. Now, he is a very smart person. I mean, he's achieved a tremendous deal, and I don't think he's going to play into the hands of Pakistan by ill-treating the Muslims of India. I think he's going to try to show the world that the project of the BJP, even after him, is now legitimate, because you can have a BJP government and that the Muslims will remain safe, that they don't have to be afraid. Now, he's already done something which few people thought he could do. He's obviously picked up Muslim votes at this election, because there are, of course, it's not a majority of Muslim votes, but there is no way these figures are possible in certain areas if Muslims didn't vote for Modi. He's picked up Muslim votes as well. So, I don't think that the worst fears about Mr. Modi will come true. I think one has to watch out much more for the RSS, and even beyond the RSS, the Shiv Sena, because there are extremists in the wings. But even the RSS would want to present a different image of India, because they are Indian patriots. And I really don't think they are going to mess things up by playing in a very obvious way into the hands of their critics. So that's what I think will happen. I don't think we will have any dramatic deterioration of Hindu-Muslim relations.
Mm-hmm. But how would the relationship between Sri Lanka and Narendra Modi be? The President congratulated Narendra Modi on being elected as the Prime Minister and even invited him to visit Sri Lanka. But how would this relationship change from Sri Lanka and a Manmohan Singh type of relationship to a Sri Lanka and Narendra Modi type of relationship?
Well, it can go both ways. It can go very well or it can go very badly. One thing that won't happen is that it won't stay in this grey area in which it stayed under the Congress and Manmohan Singh. I can share with you that in a conversation with President Rajapaksa a week before the Geneva vote, at his invitation, we met, and we were talking about the Indian elections, and I must say that he was pretty accurate. He expected and he hoped, and he also expected, that Mr. Modi would be able to form a government without relying or depending on Tamil Nadu. Now, that was way ahead of the public opinion poll. So, He's still got his political intuition working there. Now, I think there's an enormous chance, a huge chance for a Modi-Mahinda rapprochement, because these are people who are fairly similar. They're both nationalists. They're both, some may say, majoritarians. They are cut from the same homespun cloth, if you will. So there's an ideological affinity. But it can also go very wrong. Because I remember 1984 to 86 when Rajiv Gandhi had just been elected after his mother was killed, and he had more seats, his government has more seats than Mr. Modi has now. 400 odd seats. Very stable government, very strong government. And President Rajapaksa and he were very close from 84 to 86. But in 87 there was an Indian airdrop. Now the reason is that whichever government is in Delhi, however friendly the Sri Lankan president and the Indian Prime Minister are personally, however much they may see eye to eye, unless Sri Lanka addresses its Tamil question in accordance with at least its own constitution and the promises solemnly made to India, then that relationship can change drastically, dramatically. It can head in the opposite direction. That is what happened to us by 1987, because President Jayatilleka had promised devolution in 1985 through his brother H.W. Jayatilleka in Delhi. It was not implemented, and by 87 we had basically an Indian military intervention. Now, Mr. Modi is not Dr. Manmohan Singh. He's not a patient man. He's a decisive man. One of his criticisms of the Congress government has been that they will up there as little neighbors to kick India around, and that India is not punching its full weight in the neighborhood and in the world. They've said that they would be, his spokespersons have said that they would be drawing security red lines, so its neighbors would know that these lines should not be crossed without consequence. So it's going to be a new equation. It's perfectly possible to have a warm friendship between Mahinda and Modi, which can be a huge game changer for Sri Lanka. Because if we get the Indians on our side, then we can ward off this very dangerous human rights camouflage offensive from the West. But if we do not, if we try to buy time, we will find that Mr. Modi is not a patient man. The BJP and Mr. Modi, these are people who believe in the Ramayana. And I think every Sri Lankan leader will be advised not to try to play Ravana. We don't have a Ravana option with this new Indian government, given the military balance in the region. I would suggest that King Devanampiya Tissa would perhaps be a much more prudent role model for Sri Lanka's leaders.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dayan Jayatilleka, for sharing your insightful comments and views on these two significant events that have taken place over the past couple of weeks, which are going to create a ripple of change over the next couple of years for Sri Lanka and its role in the Asian region. Thank you very much for watching us. We'll see you again in a fortnight with Vantage Point right here on MTV Sports. Take care and good night.